Live from Quito, Ecuador, I'm Sunny Gray and this is From the South, the daily news brief from Telesur English, and we start this new edition right now. We start in Honduras, where one man has been killed and several other people have been arrested as the opposition began a week-long national strike. The Opposition Alliance called for the strike and demonstrations in protest against the alleged fraud in the re-election of Juan Orlando Hernandez. Riot police fired volleys of tear gas as protesters set tires on fire. One man could be seen fleeing the violence with his young son.
We demanded what we earned at the polls. Salvador was president and there was a mega fraud, and everyone saw it, and the Supreme Electoral Tribunal lent itself to that fraud.
The right belongs to us. They know they have not won anything. It's the people who won, and we will not stop demonstrating until he leaves.
The opposition strike in Honduras is expected to continue until January 27th, when President Hernandez is due to be sworn in for yet another term. On Sunday, the Honduran Congress chose a speaker and a deputy speaker from the president's own national party, in spite of protests in the street outside.
This time, the protesters gather outside the parliament to push for a speaker and deputy speakers who represent the opposition. But the government got in first and installed its own majority.
They do things in a shady way. There was a meeting at 7 a.m., but they started it before, at 6:50 a.m., and before we knew it, they had everything settled.
If the opposition leaves the 61 members aligned with a dictatorship on their own, that's the number that the National Party go through fraud. It will be clear to the people of Honduras who's supporting their country's traitors.
It will be very difficult for the opposition to get a majority in Congress, because the government has political deals with most of the country's other parties.
The deals continue inside the Congress. It's the most anti-democratic institution in this country.
For these demonstrators, who came to put pressure on the government lawmakers and support the opposition, their fight must continue on behalf of the people.
We're going to keep fighting. We will continue fighting. We're not doing it just for one person. We're doing it for our people, who want justice, health, and housing.
As before, the protests turned violent. The military and the police fired tear gas. The persecution spread into residential areas around the Congress.
They came here into the Morazan neighborhood with tear gas. We had to take the children 8 blocks away to avoid them being affected by the gas.
One can't help but feel powerless because they have arms and we don't. But this government will fall. Sooner or later, it will fall.
The protests will continue all week until Hernandez's inauguration on January 27th.
Pope Francis has apologized for remarks he made last week in Chile when he accused victims of sexual abuse of slander. The Pope said he realized his words were hurtful, but he believes Chilean Bishop Juan Barrios did not cover up crimes committed by another priest. The comments were made at the end of his visit to Chile and Peru. At the end of the 6-day tour, the pontiff cited corruption as a huge issue on the continent. And in improvised remarks to bishops, he mentioned the scandal involving the construction company Odebrecht as an example of the greed that is running wild across the continent of his birth.
Today, a large part of Latin America suffers a large decline in its politics due in part to the corruption of politics. The Odebrecht case is simply a small part of the problem. The quid pro quo, but not of healthy political negotiation which has always existed and continues to exist, but of the I covered this, but you covered this.
The Pope's final event in Peru was a huge mass in Lima, attended by more than 1.5 million believers. More details in the next report.
During 4 days of intense activities, Pope Francis highlighted several important issues like the degradation of the environment, corruption, and that the majority is excluded by a perverse and obsolete economic system. But despite the misfortunes, he spoke of the hope and the fate of the Peruvian people.
Tierra de esperanza It's a land of hope due to its biodiversity, a land of hope due to the richness of its traditions and customs that makes the soul of its people. Land of hope for its young people. I invite all not to be afraid and to be the saints of the 21st century.
The Pope's message reached the Catholics.
What I like the most is when he says that the youth is moving so fast, but it's the elderly that leads the way.
That I have to change my attitude, help the poor, and give my love to everything I can.
The message about the jungle got to me, and the respect that we need among different brothers that at the end are living in the same country, and together we will succeed.
The Holy Pontiff had great reception in all of his activities, but the closing ceremony drew more than 1.5 million people, a scene of devotion that hasn't been seen in decades. Pope Francis felt it and gave thanks.
Hermanos peruanos, Peruvian brothers, you have so many reasons to wait. I saw it and I touched it in these days. Please care. Don't let your hope be stolen. There is no better way to care of hope than to stay together, so that all these reasons that support it grow more each day.
The Pope left a message of hope for the Peruvian people and a wake-up call to the upper-class political and economic, where a miracle will be needed for the Pope's advice to be taken in consideration.
Our correspondent Veronica in Saudi has more from Lima.
The Pope is now in Peru, but before his departure, he left various messages to the people and also to the politicians. In Puerto Maldonado, he talked about the destruction of Mother Earth and talked about the economic system based on the extraction of natural resources, saying the only thing it does is increase poverty. He asked countries to have public policies that integrate the people, that the people may have access to health and education. This was in the Amazonian city of Puerto Maldonado. Afterwards in Lima, he talked against corruption, where, sitting in the first row, were Peru's highest politicians. In Trujillo, the visit was full of hope and faith. The people of the north of Peru traveled to see Pope Francis. It was more of a party than a religious ceremony, which Pope Francis participated in. Finally, he closed with a mass with at least 1.5 million people in the attendance. Various local media outlets say they had never seen a mass with so many people, not in the Vatican and nor in Spain. We talked to various citizens here in Peru, and they were very pleased with the Pope's message of hope and faith. Back to you.
We thank Veronica for that report. The European Union has announced new sanctions against Venezuela, saying that these were an expression of the bloc's concern over the political crisis in the country. The EU sanctions include a travel ban, an asset freeze on 7 senior Venezuelan officials, including some in charge of the security forces, who the Venezuelan opposition accused of abuses during the violent anti-government protests from last year. And the Venezuelan government has responded to the new EU sanctions. In a communique, the Bolivarian government energetically rejects what it calls the unilateral and illegal message. It goes on to say that these represent an erratic and interventionist policy and only go to demonstrate the EU's subordination to the racist Trump administration in the United States. Our correspondent Freddie Gillingham has the latest from Caracas.
So the EU has declared that it has imposed fresh sanctions on 7 Venezuelan officials for allegedly breaking the rule of law. This was declared today. Their headquarters released a statement saying that the move was adopted because of the deteriorating political and economic situation in the country under the President Nicolas Maduro. As a result, 7 high-ranking officials, which includes the Interior Minister, will have their assets frozen and will be banned from travelling to Europe. The EU has, of course, already imposed an arms embargo. They have yet to impose an oil embargo. If they would do such a thing, it would be catastrophic, not just for the country, but for the people. Jorge Arias, the incumbent foreign minister, has last week condemned the threats to impose sanctions, condemning them for following in the path of Trump's administration. That's all we have time for now. We will update you as the situation unfolds.
Thank you, Frandy, for that report. And we'll be back very soon, so stay with us. Welcome back. Bolivarian President Evo Morales has announced he is revoking the country's new penal code after it caused 2 months of protests. Among the changes that caused violent demonstrations were stricter penalties for criminal truck drivers and harsher medical malpractice liabilities. Legislators, evangelical groups, the media, and other sectors of society complained that the changes would limit their ability to operate.
To avoid any confusion, and in addition to clarify so many lies, we have and I have decided to repeal the new penal system code. And I reiterate again that we are going to send a note to the National Assembly so that they listen to us and we listen to the people.
Meanwhile, President Morales is also celebrating 12 years of leadership of a political process called a democratic and cultural revolution, which has included campesinos, indigenous people, and other social sectors in the state administration. Details in the next report.
President Evo Morales prides himself on having a social cabinet, as he calls it, and social organizations likewise think of the government as their own, a system that is now celebrating 12 years.
The Constitution protects us today to be equal, men and women at work, everything 50-50.
We can see that in the country there have been deep changes in many aspects. We also have to look to the other side, the human side. They have taken us into account.
The current administration approved a new constitution that left behind the old republic and that created the plurinational state that recognizes its 36 indigenous peoples and gender equality.
Through the economic stability guaranteed by the nationalization of the hydrocarbon industry, a process of democratization of access to wealth was achieved. With this removal of inequality between rich and poor, it took more than 2 million Bolivians out of poverty. 2 million that used to live with less than $1 a day.
The nationalization of strategic companies, like hydrocarbons, gave economic strength to the state that of 18% passed to control the 82% of oil business profits.
Poverty has been reduced dramatically by 20% in Bolivia. This is a fact that, for me, is a central one of this government's management. Obviously, there is constantly great social investments being made. There is economic stability.
International organizations certify the decrease of poverty from 38 to less than 20%. In the first 3 years of this administration, the country was declared free of illiteracy, and policies against discrimination and sexism are being promoted.
There is an improvement in the fight against racism. Those injustices of having a feudal vision, a colonial vision. Today is a statutory framework to demand equal treatment. We, as a country, have buried the old Republican state and built this new plurinational state. It's possible to make a new society.
In recent years, the state has promoted the industrialization of all natural gas within its own resources. A giant plant produces urea in the center of the country. The purpose now is to make Bolivia the main producer and exporter of energy through environmentally friendly systems.
China and the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC, are meeting in Chile for their first ministerial meeting to be held in South America. The Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and officials from 33 CELAC country members are set to promote new joint initiatives. China's focus will be the region's participation in the Belt and Road Initiative across the Pacific Ocean.
The Belt and Road Initiative proposed by China has attracted widespread attention among the Latin American countries. The Belt and Road Initiative is an innovation of China, which is in high accordance with the development of the times. We need broader connectivity, more investment in infrastructure, and more trade and investment. So the initiative is widely welcomed. Working together, the two sides can achieve mutually beneficial and win-win results in globalization.
The president of Ecuador, Lenin Moreno, has described WikiLeaks founder Jullian Assange as an inherited problem who has created trouble for his government. Assange was given asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London in 2012 by the former president Rafael Correa. Ecuador's foreign minister tried to obtain diplomatic status for Assange, but the British authorities had denied the request. The government said it was looking for a swift solution to this situation.
This option was taken by the foreign minister, and she gave us the explanation, including the requirements to obtain citizenship that Mr. Assange was fulfilling, and the possibility that he could, with diplomatic rank, be allowed to leave the embassy, and that would have solved our problem for good. We hope to have a positive result in the short term on this issue that has caused us more than a nuisance.
The Colombian government has sent its lead peace negotiator with the ELN back to Quito, Ecuador, to resume talks that were called off in mid-January. President Santos had recalled Gustavo Bell from the peace negotiations that fell on the final day of the 101-day ceasefire with the guerrilla group, citing a fresh wave of attacks. And demonstrations are restarting in Brazil this Monday to defend the right of the former president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, to stand in this year's presidential elections. The protests will start in Porto Alegre, where the leader of the landless movement, the MST, called on social movements to turn out en masse.
This week, we will have another battle where we will decide the political future of our country. The bourgeoisie wants to prevent Lula from being a candidate. They won't succeed. But we of the working class and the popular movements will have to be there, present and mobilized, to tell them that we will not accept anymore that the courts act as the overseer of capitalists' interests. Lula is not the candidate of the Workers' Party. Lula is the expression, the symbol of the Brazilian working class. And it's not possible to have democratic elections in Brazil without the participation of the working class.
Our correspondent, Andre Vieira, has the latest from Porto Alegre.
We are in Porto Alegre, following the protests organized by several social movements who are defending democracy through a national strike. They are also defending former President Lula da Silva's right to run for president in the upcoming elections. More than 3,000 people joined the march, which will continue until Wednesday, when the trial against Lula da Silva is expected to resume at the Federal Regional Tribunal. These social movements are arguing that there is no real evidence against the former president. They say this is just a measure that helped current President Michel Temer rise to power after Dilma Rousseff was impeached. Farmers, workers, and youth movements have joined the protests. We will keep you informed on the latest in this story.
And now to a unique story in Venezuela, where community debates on the new national plan are breathing new life in the country's social missions. Our Freddie Gillingham reports.
Builders start work early here in the San Pedro parish of Caracas, but these are no ordinary builders. When these houses are finished, those who built them and their families will be able to move in and call it home. This project, organised by a local youth movement, will house 23 young families, and although it was pioneered by the younger members of this community, all ages are involved in what is a collective effort.
It was an initiative that after President Hugo Chavez mentioned it that we can occupy underutilized buildings and spaces, we created an organization of 23 youths and presented the project to build this multifamily housing. This is what it is.
But this group of citizens have ambitions that reach far beyond the four walls of their new homes. Just one of their ideas is a locally run audio-visual and printed media operation. To make that dream a reality, the community is proposing a new self-management law, which they hope will become part of the nationwide debate over the next Homeland Plan.
We are a group who make decent homes for our people. Our proposed law for the Homeland Plan is one of self-management, so it could be our legacy to the people and be implemented not just in Venezuela, but globally. That way, every country can be aware of what self-management means and how to work together without depending on the government or anyone else.
Across the country, Venezuelans are currently proposing and discussing ideas for a new homeland plan. The government's aim is to encourage the Venezuelan people themselves to help it mould its future policies, be them social laws or environmental ones to tackle issues such as climate change. President Maduro has called on society to come together and create a new plan of action to cover the years 2019 to 2025. A community like this, in one of the capital's parishes, is just one example of many of those who are committed to having their say, as their country seeks to lay new foundations for its future generations. Freddie Gillingham, Telesur, Caracas.
Residents of the island of Dominica are still trying to resume some semblance of a normal life after Hurricane Maria destroyed the island. So the Dominican government has launched a special work program for those who lost their jobs, some over WhatsApp messages after the hurricane. The special work program aims to provide 1,100 jobs in the first instance.
The program should be transitional and operated for a period of 6 months in the first instance. The program itself should explore all job opportunities within the public sector and the private sector, including opportunities within the firms and agencies that may have made the very persons redundant purely based on its inability to pay.
And we'll be back very soon, so stay with us. Welcome back. As the world's wealthiest prepare for the World Economic Forum in Davos on Tuesday, global charity Oxfam has published a report calling for action against the growing gap between the super rich and the rest of the world. The theme of the World Economic Forum this year is creating a shared future in a fractured world. The 4-day event will have hundreds of sessions discussing global, regional, and industrial agendas, but critics, including Oxfam, have questioned the World Economic Forum's vision of globalization. In their report, Oxfam says 42 people hold as much wealth as 3.7 billion, who make up the poorest half of the world's population. It also added that 82% of the global wealth generated in 2017 went to the wealthiest 1%. Now to a special report looking at 1 year of President Donald Trump's policies towards Latin America and the Caribbean.
Latin American and Caribbean countries have taken an anti-Trump stance after the United States president made discriminatory comments towards the people of the region. In Mexico, Trump has just a 5% popularity rate, and in countries like Chile or Peru, which haven't been directly attacked, the number never exceeds 15%.
Every action made by Trump is wrong. He has to watch himself in a mirror and realize that what he's doing affects the whole community of migrants around the world, not only Hispanic people.
Nobody imagined that in just a year his policies would be even more hostile than his words. He referred to Haiti and El Salvador as shitholes.
He is a bigger piece of shit than any of us in El Salvador.
He decided that 59,000 Haitians and 200,000 El Salvadorians who have been legally working for years in the U.S. must leave the country now.
A really terrible thing for the 200,000 people that may be affected, and also for the Salvadoran economy, which gets about 17% of its income from remittances.
A military option. In 2017, Trump threatened Venezuela, stating that he will militarily intervene there. This was rejected by every Latin American president.
The Venezuelan regime.
Later, the U.S. redirected its strategies, declaring an economic war by establishing sanctions against the Bolivarian country.
It prevents Venezuela from restructuring its debt, and so that would be a part of any kind of, program for economic recovery there. So that's a very serious. It's illegal under the OAS Charter, under some international Geneva conventions.
It's going to be a great day for Cuba.
Relations with Cuba went backwards in migratory and commercial matters. The State Department expelled 15 Cuban diplomats and accused the Greater Antilles government of knowing about alleged sonic attacks, which they have yet to provide proof for. According to analysts, Trump's administration only supports the governments which pay him homage.
And then there was Honduras as well, where they helped legitimize what even the OAS leadership, which is a close ally of the United States, could not recognize as an honest election.
The President of the United States!
Trump still has 3 more years in the White House, which is time enough to change his policies toward the Latin American and Caribbean people, for better or for worse.
And now let's have a look at some of the other stories making headlines around the world.
Hundreds of thousands of federal workers will not go to work on Monday as the U.S. Senate struggles to end a government shutdown. Essential services will still run, but famous sites and monuments have been affected by the shutdown. Dozens of national parks and monuments were expected to remain partially or entirely closed. The Statue of Liberty was closed on Sunday, but New York Governor Andrew Cuomo vowed to use the state funds to keep the landmark monument in operation.
The concept of closing the doors to immigrants is repugnant to the concept of America. And that's what we've been arguing for years. We're all sons and daughters of immigrants. Unless you're a Native American, you are an immigrant.
Around 30 people have been killed, most of them foreigners, as Taliban attackers stormed Kabul's Intercontinental Hotel Saturday night. A number of insurgents launched the assault against the hotel when the facility was hosting a wedding party and telecommunications conference. Some 160 people were rescued after Afghan troops fought throughout the night to regain control of the building. 3 attackers were also killed in the siege, officials said. 10 people, including 4 civilians, were injured. Congolese security forces shot dead at least 5 people and fired tear gas to disperse a banned protest against President Joseph Kabila, organized by the Catholic Church on Sunday. Kabila's refusal to step down at the end of his mandate in December 2016 has triggered a series of street protests in which scores have been killed in Kinshasa. Congolese forces have been threatening protesters not to demonstrate.
Mass is over. The priest should now go home, and everybody else should go home. If you refuse, we will use force and shoot tear gas. Let that be very clear.
Ongoing French prison strike has entered second week after 2 prison guards were assaulted by an inmate at a jail in northern France. A number of inmate attacks on prison guards have taken place recently that has led to nationwide strike action. President Emmanuel Macron has promised to outline plans to revamp the prison system by the end of February, expected to include facility renovations and expansions to house an additional 15,000 inmates.
With that, we've come to the end of this daily news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website, tellusyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I am Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.
Telesur is branching out into new territories to democratize information.
It's insight into the world from a South American perspective.
We now broadcast live in English.